Hello. Whoop, I'm on. Hello, welcome. Before we get started, please squeeze in, everyone. This is a full session. People are still coming in. There's room here in the front and in the middle, so there should be room for everyone. People that just walks in. All right. Timer hasn't started yet. That's good. We got some seats up here in the middle, in between. I don't know if you can squeeze in. All right, let's just start the timer. I think it's time. Well, yes, hello, and welcome everyone to Modern Web Tooling in Visual Studio 2015. We're going to build some websites today, one website. And there's a very big thing right here, so hello over there. I have to be careful not falling off the stage here. So my name is Mads Christensen, and I work on the Visual Studio Web Tooling team, building all the ASP.NET and front-end development features in Visual Studio. And we're going to look at some of the new stuff that we have in 2015. So some of it you've probably already seen if you've played around with the preview and the CTPs, but we have some new stuff in the RC build. So hands up real quick. How many here have installed the RC? Okay, that's good. How many here have installed the preview of one of the CTPs? Hands up, come on. Okay, that's a lot of you. That's like half of the room. That's awesome. Okay, so let's just look at this. So what I want to talk about today is, so first of all, we're going to build this. We're going to build a website, and we're going to do that with some of the new tooling on top of the brand new project system that drives ASP.NET 5. We will do a static website though. So there's a lot of ASP.NET 5 talks here. There's one tomorrow morning with Damien and Hanselman. So you definitely want to go check that one out. But we're going to talk more about the sort of the tooling around it, but not necessarily ASP.NET itself. And so we have some new stuff for package managers. That's really exciting. We got some new task runners. That's brand new to Visual Studio. Some of you might have seen that. And we have some extensions. And I'm just going to use them throughout. These are extensions for Visual Studio that, of course, are free and that you cannot live without. Okay? Or maybe I cannot live without. Might be more accurate. And we're going to build some Bootstrap and Angular, and we'll see what happens. But so let's just start with the beginning. So package managers. We are shipping a few new ones. So the first one is Bower. So Bower is a client-side package manager. Let's say that you want jQuery, AngularJS, Bootstrap CSS, a client-side framework or library. Bower can now help you out. So instead of using NuGet, which we still have, right? You might want to start to look at Bower. And there's a very good reason for this. Sort of the rest of the world, people not using Visual Studio and NuGet, they all use Bower. So there's a huge ecosystem around Bower. And all the packages that are there, when Angular, for instance, just as an example, when they release a new version of AngularJS, they release it to Bower. They don't necessarily release it to NuGet. So you're going to have a lot more up-to-date packages and a lot more of them on Bower, which is really good. So Bower, we're going to use that for client-side packages. So on top of that, we're also looking at a few task runners here, and specifically Grunt and Gulp. So minifying JavaScript and CSS files, bundling, compiling TypeScript, compiling CoffeeScript into JavaScript, and so on, we can use sort of industry standard task runners. So before we might have used an MS Build task, we might have used Web Essentials, we might have used any other sort of tool or runtime component, right, an ASP.NET runtime thing. But what we can do now is that we can do it statically, and we can use it both at design time in Visual Studio or on our build servers, CI environments, and so on, using Grunt or Gulp. And so we're going to take a look at that and why that is a really, really good idea to do. And then finally, the last package manager, NPM. This is a Node package manager. So we use that, like rule of thumb, that's how we bring in tooling into our workflow. Okay? So that's how we bring in the task runners, Gulp and Grunt, for instance. We install them through the Node package manager. So what's really cool about this is we can now version the tooling, the compilers, all the stuff that we do to build our client-side application, we can version that per project. So you can update how your compiler in one project without it affecting another project. So you can always stay up to the latest on your new project, but you might want to keep to a former version on some other projects that you've got. So that is now possible. And if you think about what we're doing with ASP.NET 5 and the core CLR, where you can version your entire ASP.NET application by shipping the runtime in the app itself, now you can do that with tooling as well. So it kind of closes the loop. So that's really awesome. You can also use NPM for client-side packages, and that's fine too. But rule of thumb, the way I look at it, that might be through, in Visual Studio, you want to use that for bringing in tooling. So the goals here for the bringing in these tools, package managers and task runners, see if this works, here we go, is that they have to be first-class citizens. These are command line tools. They don't have any UI. People that are not using Visual Studio maybe and that have used these tools for years, they use them through the command line. And so we have to make sure that if Visual Studio understands and supports these new tools, it has to be as a first-class citizen, right? So we have Solution Explorer integration. We have a new tool window called Task Runner Explorer. And it just have to feel natural. That is super important. Like the muscle memory that we all have from using Visual Studio, the way that we experience Visual Studio has to be the same by using these new command line tools. And it's very important that there's nothing Visual Studio specific about it. Because the goal here is that, let's say you have a team, and one person is on Windows and Visual Studio, and another team member is on Mac in Sublime Text. So first of all, ASP.NET 5, you can do that, right? It's cross-plat. But we want to do the same with tooling. And so if someone on a Mac sits on the command line and performs all the same things for package management and for task runners, we want to make sure that that also works in Visual Studio. And Visual Studio doesn't add anything that only works in Visual Studio. It has to work across the board. Right? Super important. And this was the point. Like, if we couldn't do this, we would not have implemented any of this stuff. That was like super important. And then it's extensible. So I mentioned the two task runners that we got, Gulp and Grunt. Right. This is extendable. You can add providers for other stuff. So if you're into script.cs, there is a PVS build system. There's a PowerShell one as well. There's other types of stuff. This is extendable. You can add all this stuff yourself. And then finally, it's optional. Again, very, very important. If you don't want to use this, don't. But I'm sure after today, you all want to use this. Okay. So when you install Visual Studio, so those of you who already installed the RC bits, you notice that when the installer shows up and you have the list of checkboxes, which ones you want to check, right? Which are the features you want to install, only one checkbox was checked by default. That was the web development tools. Because the web is everywhere, and it's now sort of the base for a lot of different things, like Apache Cordova apps and all this sort of stuff. So that's the only one that's checked by default. And I assume since you're here in this room that you all want to install that. But when you do, here is what you get in the box that you probably didn't realize. You get Node .exe. Under the covers, it's not installed globally. It's living within Visual Studio somewhere under C program files, Visual Studio. You get NPM. You get Bower. You get the Grunt CLI if you want to use the Grunt task runner. And you get Git. So what this means is that Visual Studio is able to work with all these tools, which are all based on Node.js, without you having to install anything. You don't actually even have to know that it runs on Node.js. It doesn't matter. It happens in the background. And Visual Studio is able to handle all that for us. Now, if you want a newer version of Node.exe, or you want a newer version of Bower, like an update comes out, you can make sure that Visual Studio takes the version you want instead of taking the one that's installed by default. So you're completely in control of what versions of each of these components that Visual Studio will use, which is really cool. Demo. All right. Was there a question? The question is, does it add it to the path? So the global environment variable called path, does it add it there so you can open a console and interact with these things? No, it does not. We're looking at maybe doing that for RTM, but it doesn't do that for RC for various different reasons. If you have some of them installed already, we don't want to have any conflicts there. But that might change. But as I will show you in a second, that you don't have to worry about that. OK. So let's just jump into it. Here I have a really, really empty project. This is the new ASP.NET 5 project system. And it is very empty. I don't know if you've probably seen this keynote or some other presentation. We have a new concept called the root. This is where we put our static content, like images, style sheets, and so on. What you might not know is if we open project.json, is that that's configurable. You can name it whatever you want. Okay? You can call it public or dist or anything you want. Or you can just hit a dot and save that. And now the icon went away from over here. Now I can delete this folder. And now the root of my project is my root. Okay? So this is just for simplicity for the demo here. We now have a very, very empty project. So let's just add index.html. So how do you do that? You do like right click and say add new item. And then you search for HTML, right? Give it a name. So that's one way of doing it. You could also just hit Shift F2 and do index.html. And then we can do HTML5. Boom. Like this, right? So this is an extension called add new file. I'm not very creative with my naming of extensions, but this is one of the ones you cannot live without. OK, so let's just put in some content. Like let's do a header with an h1 and call it build, right? Like this. And let's run it. So now we have a beautiful beginning of a website here. So I want to use Bootstrap. And so what I would do before is that I would use NuGet to bring in Bootstrap, the CSS framework. But in this new world, I want to use Bower instead. Okay? And to do that, just like for NuGet packages, we have a file called packages.config. Bower has a very similar thing called bower.json. So let's just add a file to the root of our project called bower.json. So here's what it looks like. It's just a JSON file. Check this out. You get full IntelliSense, and we even get like the name here is at the top because it's a required property. So that makes it easy. Let's just do this. And let's write dependencies. And check this out, Bootstrap. You get full IntelliSense from the Bootstrap registry online. Okay? This is now search. You search within IntelliSense here. This is live search result coming back from Bower. And we get the version number here. And all I have to do to install this package is to save this file. That's not how I do it. Save. Here we go. And we can now see Package Manager does something here in the console. And we now have a dependencies node saying Bower and Bootstrap. And if we open up, we can see Bootstrap depends on jQuery. So Bower takes care of our dependencies, just like NuGet does. So it also installed jQuery. Now, if we move over to what it looks like on disk, we can see we have a Bower components folder. and I have Bootstrap and jQuery right here. It's flat. It's a flat list. And so this is now installed, but we don't show that over here. So the thing is, well, we can just say show hidden files and folders. And we have Bower components showing up right here. So I can now take the Bootstrap that is in there, Bootstrap CSS, right? It's in here under dist, CSS, and I got my CSS files right here. So I can just use that. I can deploy my Bower components folder to my web server, and that's fine. But, and personally, I like to just take the files that comes in through Bower and copy them into a folder in my application. Okay? So instead of shipping the entire Bower components folder, I just want to take only the files that I need and put them in my project. So in order to do that, I want to automate that stuff. So in case that I update Bootstrap one day, I want to be able to push a button and I get the fresh copies into my project, right? So in order to do that, I need to have some sort of task. Now we've always had MS Build as being sort of our task runner of sorts. And but this new world where we have other task runners like the grunt and gulp scenario, this seems to be a better fit. So let's take a look at gulp. So first of all, I need to install gulp, okay? And gulp is a node module, and it comes in through NPM. And NPM and Bower are very similar. So I'm going to add a file called package.json. And this is very much the same. Let's see here. Zoom in. Again, name. It doesn't matter what you call it. Whoop. Version. Let's just give it this. And notice, by the way, down here, so Web Essentials gives us a little icon here because I don't know if you've noticed, but this file and the Bower file, they kind of look the same. All these JSON files look the same. So Web Essentials puts in a little logo down here in the corner so we know what we're doing. It's kind of nice. And so we do the same thing here. We say dev dependencies, and let's get gulp, and let's get this version. I'm just going to save it. And we see now the output window here. We see what happens under the covers. And for those of you who use these tools on the command line, we're just calling npm install. Okay? Everything Visual Studio has done so far is acting as a proxy between me and the command line. So I don't have to use the command line if I don't want to. So now we have our gulp is over here and all the dependencies. Again, we don't show the actual node modules folder, but it is right here. And we can see we have gulp installed. So now I have a specific version of gulp installed in my specific project. And I can now start using tasks. So let's start doing that. So I want a file called gulp file. Actually, if you don't want all that, you can still do add new item and search for gulp. And there is all this stuff, gulp, Bower, okay, and the npm. So it's all here. You can search for. I just like that extension. I think that's great. So I'm going to do that. Gulp file.js, and it's empty, right? So if I had said add new item, chose the gulp file, there would have been something in there. But I have a snippet. You have a snippet. We all have a snippet called gulp. Just hit tab, and we're set up here. So I'm now going to create a task that copies my Bower components, my Bootstrap, into my project. So here's how that works. We have some helpers in gulp. Notice here that you get really, really nice IntelliSense. If I can hit the keys here. You do get really nice IntelliSense. Check this out. To make it really, really easy, and we want the source. This is usually what you always want. Because now we're going to point at this is the root / here. So Bower _ components Bootstrap dist. So that's, I remember the folder structure. You might not, but I've done this before. And then we're going to pipe that. So gulp is a stream-based task manager. So everything is streams. So now I'm going to create a file stream because I've select these files on disk. I'm going to pipe that stream into, in this case, sort of the opposite, a place to put the files, to save them on disk. So another file stream, I guess. And so for that, I have a helper called gulp dest. So let's put this at the root in a folder called lib that does not exist yet, and call it bootstrap like this. I'm going to save this file. So we have this new thing called Task Runner Explorer. That shows up right here. Just by me saving the file, it goes out and figures out what are the tasks available. And the copy task that I just created is available right here. So I can now just click it. And that was quick. It was a little too quick. Oh. See here, it's all copied in. 8.34 milliseconds. That's the speed of gulp. Okay? So very, very fast here. So now I have everything in here. I can go into my page. Let's add, what did we say, lib, bootstrap, CSS. Let's just take the minifier one here, like that. And then we should probably wrap this in a container. So for those of you familiar with Bootstrap, we're going to add some classes to our HTML to take advantage of that. So we've added a new little thing called the surround with tag. Right? It's just a little thing, but it's so great. Like that. Let me do that again. Shift-Alt-W. So those of you who use Sublime Text, you know this shortcut. It's the same. Surround with tag. Boom. And I'm just going to keep the div, hit the space bar here. And class equals container. And notice here how you get the full IntelliSense showing up with the icon here. Right? This is the Bootstrap icon. So we know that this is Bootstrap. We're going to do the same here. And this is called page header. And let's just save this. And then we go back to zooming out. Let's run this again. And so now it looks a lot better, right? So now we have our responsive UI. We've set up Bootstrap very, very simply. But the cool thing is it might be you add a little bit of files here in the beginning. But the way we can automate this from now on is really, really powerful. Okay? So now I have a full workflow. Now I'm taking advantage of NPM, Bower, and gulp to run tasks. I have not touched the command line. I have not done anything weird, I would say. Like, it feels kind of Visual Studio-like. I don't know if you agree. But there's nothing out of the ordinary, really. I can take it a step further. I can have any of my tasks to do something when a specific Visual Studio event occurs. So let's go back here to our copy task, right-click. I can bind that to, let's say, after build. Okay? Like that. So now, after build, runs the copy task. So what does that mean? Let's just close this. It means if I now build, Control-Shift-B, there we go, it runs my grunt task, or gulp task. It's my muscle memory that I keep intact here. And under the hood, we spin up Node and do all sorts of fancy things. But you don't notice, and you don't have to notice. Okay? Okay. So that was part of it. So let's look at bringing in Angular. So Angular. Sometimes it takes a little while to find the version here. Here we go. And let's just save that. And while that is installing into my dependencies, let's go to the gulp file and do something similar. So let's say Angular. And this is a little different. I want everything that starts with Angular that has either JS or map as the file extension. And I'm going to put that over here to Angular. I'm going to save that, execute my copy task, and I now have Angular. Okay? So notice here how you get this nice file nesting by default now. That's kind of nice. All right, so, and again, we go back to our index page here, and script. Oh. do this. All right? So installing these packages, when you first set it up, is extremely fast and convenient. Okay? Now, this obviously doesn't do anything yet, because what I really want to do first is I want to add a little custom styling. So right now it's just Bootstrap, the default sort of Bootstrap theme, but I want to add a little custom design, basically. So I want to use CSS, but actually, I really want to use less instead of CSS. So less, for those of you who haven't tried that, that is sort of a superset of CSS that compiles down to CSS. Okay? So let me just add a less file. Again, Shift F2. Now check this out. Let's create a folder called less. And inside that, I want to add variables.less. And here we go. So now I have our less folder right here with variables. So let's just do something really fantastic, such as create a variable called background tomato. That's an actual color, by the way. And save that. It's not because I spelled it wrong. There we go. So let's add a new file, a new less file. Let's call it site.less. So here, I just want to import my variables less right here. And we can do something as fancy as set the background color to, notice here you get the IntelliSense here flows in from my imported variables file. And I can hover it and it says tomato. So that's kind of nice. So now I have my very, very beautiful layout here all done. And now I want to compile this into less. So again, there has been a lot of ways to do this before. Use Web Essentials is one way. Use some runtime component. That's another way. Use MS Build, a third way. But we're going to use Gulp. And what's really cool about this is that we can do it all statically. And again, because it's Gulp, it works on test servers. It works on CI servers and all this sort of stuff. We did not get that with Web Essentials. Right? If Web Essentials was installed, the workflow was broken. So in this case, I'm just going to use Gulp. And so if we jump in here to package.json, I want to get the less compiler. So I'm actually installing the compiler into my project right now. And that's this version. I'm going to save that. And it's now installing. So if we look over here, npm, come on. No. There we go. It's running. Gulp less, it's coming in. So now I just have to create a compile task. So gulp task. So Web Essentials gives us a few extra snippets here. It looks like this. So let's do some less compiling. So what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to find what are the files that I want to listen to. So gulp watch. I'm going to say, no, gulp source. I want to say find any file in the less folder that ends with .less. Okay? So this is globbing patterns. What's really cool about this, the flexibility we get here in terms of the globbing patterns to find the files and save the files is amazing. Right? We get that for free. If you're used to PowerShell, you know how sort of the search patterns and the globbing patterns work. It's very similar to this. And it's really powerful. So here I just say, for any less file that exists in my less folder, I'm going to pipe that. Well, first of all, I forgot the most important part. I have to actually include my less compiler here. So I'm going to say less equals require. So here you get nice IntelliSense. Called less. I'm now going to pipe my less files. Actually, I'm only going to save my site.less because it imported my variables.less. So pipe my newly imported less component right here. Call that function. Now check this out. I get IntelliSense for the different options available for this specific less compiler. Yes. So this is a new feature in 2015. We have what's called object literal IntelliSense. So I'm inside an anonymous object in C#, right? An object literal in JavaScript. And we can now have full IntelliSense. So I can set this to compress equals true, which means minify. So if you're noticing what I'm doing here, I have two less files. Site.less imports the other one. Okay? That's sort of bundling. And then I'm compressing it as well, like minifying it. So very, very easily, I can compile less, do my bundling and minification, and I can do it all like this, gulp.destination. Now I can put it in any folder I want, but let's just put it in the exact same folder, just because, why not? So Task Runner Explorer, you can see we now have our list task shows up. Let's run it. 14 milliseconds. And I have site.css minified and compiled right here. So this is really nice. So now I can go in here to my variables, and let's change this to green. And go back here and run the task again. And it's done, and now I get the, oh, my CSS file was updated. Do you want to reload it? Yes, please. And it's green. So that's really nice. But the workflow here is not very good. I don't want to manually run this task every time. I want it to happen automatically. And so let's just do that. So let's go back to, let me just close this site CSS here. Let's go back here. So what I want to do is I want to set up a file watcher that listens to whenever any less file in my less folder changes. I want it to recompile less. Okay? So let's do a gulp test called watch. Gulp watch. And here we're going to say any less file. It doesn't matter which less file I'm going to modify. I want to run one or more tasks. In this case, just one, called less. Okay? So we can now see the watch task shows up here. I'm going to save that. It's now running. As you can see here, it's running. It doesn't do anything. It just watches my folder. So let's change the variable here to blue. Save. And you can see here really quickly, it ran. And we're talking milliseconds here. It's really fast. And we can see here now my output is blue. So this is the workflow I want. I want it to automatically do this sort of stuff when I save the file, right? Makes sense. But do I have to then automatically start the watch task every time? Well, no, because I can right-click my watch task and bind it to Project Open. Okay? So I think you can guess what happens when I open the project. It will automatically start up. Actually, it will do something that's even cooler than that. Let's say that your node modules and your Bower components folder is empty because you might not check it into source control. And you do a fresh get latest or git clone or whatever you do. And this will automatically restore your packages, and then it will call the watch task. Right? The idea is here that it's the same thing as when you use the command line, but it's better. But just to illustrate, let's just stop this watch task. Like that. And let's open the command line. Alt space. I have another great extension. It's called Open Command Line. I need a PR agent or something for that. Anyway, so open command line does open command lines. And it's whatever file you're on here, it opens it at that directory. Or if you right-click a specific directory, you can say, like, open command line. Right? You can say, oh, I want the developer command prompt PowerShell. Or like just completely customize and say, well, which one do you want to run? Do you want to run Commander or something custom, whatever. So set that up to your favorite, PoshGit and all that stuff. So that's really, that comes in handy for a lot of reasons. So one of them is that we can interact with like NPM and Bower and Gulp. But also if you want to run MS build tasks or Git commands, TFS commands, and so on, right? It has a lot of multi-purpose here. So let's just run Gulp watch. So this is how I execute it. So this looks pretty much identical to what we saw in the Task Runner Explorer down here when I ran that. So let's just say that you're fine with the command line, which a lot of people are, and that's cool. You don't have to use the Task Runner Explorer. You can just do this, and we see here if I change this back to corn silk, maybe, and save that. says, oh, my CSS file was updated. And here we go. You saw how fast that was. Right, now I'm running, it's a console that runs. It's not Visual Studio. It's because it's the same thing. Super important, right? It's super important that it is the same thing. Okay. So let's just add our thing here. So that was called less site CSS right there. Oh. And now we have beautiful corn silk, which is like almost white. That was not a good one. Let's do Dodger blue. Okay, so this thing is still running. Close it down. Wow. Okay, so that's beautiful. Okay, so far so good. Let's go back to my index file here. So so now that I have Angular, I have my styling set up. It's time for me to build my app, and let's do that. So what do we want to do here? We want to create a div. We want to create a input. So basically, I want to do like basic model binding in Angular here. So let's just do an input with a class equals form control, like this. And so let's just see what that looks like. That is very pretty. But what I really want to do is I want to have a little icon. You know how Bootstrap, these CSS frameworks, they come with like icons that we can use, like icon fonts. So I want a little icon to show up here. So for that, I'll have to give this a class equals input group. That. And then let's do a span. And this span has a class as well called add-on, like that. And then I'm ready to add this is Bootstrap. This is just Bootstrap weirdness, right? But now I'm ready to inject my image. So let's just do an I, doesn't matter. Class equals glyph icon. Now check this out. This is pretty nice, isn't it? Works for Bootstrap, Foundation, Ico Moon. Yes, that is a thing. And Font Awesome, yep. And one more, what is the, 5, there's 5. More to come, of course. This is actually an extension that is called Glyph Friends. I'll have a list of all these extensions afterwards. But so a guy called Ryan Williams, he wrote this and he figured out that there was actually issues with Visual Studio on how this would work. So he just contacted us and said, hey, I can't make this work the way I want it to. And so we fixed it. So for RC, it's now possible to do what he does here. And today, he's releasing this thing. So that's really exciting that it works for all these different libraries. So we're going to do something like, I think the briefcase would be appropriate. I don't know. So let's use that. And so my input here, I'm going to do Angular here. So of course, you get like nice icons here for Angular. Angular model equals text. I'm just making this up. Text. And then let's do something out here maybe. Like block quote. Nice syntax highlighting here. I put text in. So now I'm model binding my input box to that little block quote field right there. And because it's Angular, we always remember to do this if we have to, which we do in this case. And save that. And now we go back, and I did it on the wrong element. So there is that. And here we go. So hello world / build, I guess. So now we have an Angular app. Granted, it's simple. But we get all this without having to use the command line, without having to do any of this. And I hope you kind of see the value of using these package managers, the power of using Gulp or Grunt. They sort of solve the same problem. So in case you're wondering why do I use Gulp instead of Grunt, it could have been either or. It's always a personal preference. I prefer Gulp myself. And this is not hard. I hope that you agree. This is not as scary, maybe, as when I started looking into it. I thought it was a little bit scary. It is very simple, and the goal here is to close the gap between the Visual Studio world and sort of the rest of the world. So you've probably come across this issue where you go to a website, like you go to like some JavaScript library that you want to download. You go to the website and it says, yeah, download here, just call Bower install. And you're like, well, I don't know what to do with that information. And the same goes for like node modules, right? And so there has been, well, I'm a Visual Studio person, so this whole Bower install thing, that doesn't apply to me, so this is not for me. Let me just go search NuGet. And maybe you find it on NuGet, maybe, right? So what we're trying to do here is to close the gap and eliminate the whole, like, us and them. Let's just all be happy together, use the same tools. If you want to sit on a Mac in Sublime and another team member wants to sit in Visual Studio, that's awesome. Just deploy it to Azure, right? But yeah, exactly. But that's the power of all this stuff. And what's cool about all the stuff I just showed you, it works in Cordova apps as well. Right? The grunt, the go, it works in MVC 5, it works in web forms, it works in website projects, all the save the Bower file that automatically creates or installs these components for us. It works everywhere. I have projects running on both web forms and MVC, and website projects in Razor web pages, all using the same tools that we see here. Okay? And have them build on CI servers and all that sort of stuff. So people ask me a lot, like, why have I removed the less compilers and stuff like that from Web Essentials? I don't know if you've noticed, but I have in the 2015 version. Well, there are several reasons. One of them was it kind of was not very stable. So the crashes you saw came from those components in Web Essentials. Also, that it didn't have the flexibility that we have here. Like the way I can do the globbing patterns to find out the exact files, the way I can pipe between different functionality that I bring in, Web Essentials cannot do that. You need something richer, more like programming, more like JavaScript. Okay? And then third of all, I can't compile Web Essentials anymore with the huge number of the node modules that we include inside Web Essentials. So that's why it's gone. That is why it's gone. And I hope that you agree that this is an okay substitute. This is really powerful stuff. Right? And finally, it works on CI. That was the big complaint. Or from TFS build, from VSO, from GitHub Kudu deploy to Windows, to Azure websites and so on. Right? All right. So, but there is one more thing. Yeah. Yes, sir. When is the task runner killed? So let's just run a task. I click the copy. It runs, done. It kills. It dies right there. If I watch for a file, it never ends. Here I'm just watching. It's running, and it keeps running, and it does not die. How do you kill it? If Visual Studio crashes, I've heard the rumors. No, the process goes with it. So no, you're not going to have lingering processes running because of this. Yeah. All right, so let's just look at, let's install React. Anyone here looking at React.js, playing around with it, being frustrated on Visual Studio while trying to do that? No? So I'm just going to save my Bower. That means that it shows up in the meanwhile. I'm going to head in here and copy it over. So React is this other framework, JavaScript framework. We need our JavaScript frameworks. So React, anything starting with React called JS. React, save that. Go. Let's run the copy. And now we have React. Okay, so anything that you add, any JavaScript framework that you add, what we want to remember, and it is a bit unfortunate, but we always have to remember this weird file called _references.js. Okay, you've seen it and thought, what the hell is that? I'll show you. So, _references.js. It's a file that we need for IntelliSense to pick up all the different JavaScript files that we have in our project. We need it because we want IntelliSense for maybe every JavaScript file in our project or only a few of them. And so we list here what it is that we want in the order that we want it. Because remember, the JavaScript editor in Visual Studio is the only one of its kind that actually executes your JavaScript. Okay? So ordering matters. It's like in the browser. You have to load jQuery before any jQuery plugins, right? Same thing goes here. So, but it's kind of easy. So I just have my reference.js. I can right-click it in Solution Explorer, or I can right-click it in here. And I can say update JavaScript references, or I can say autosync. That means whenever I add or delete a JavaScript file, it just automatically shows up in here, or is being removed. So update JavaScript references gives me this. I don't necessarily want my gulp file here in this case. And maybe I want references to be up here. So Alt and then arrow keys up and down to move lines up and down. That's pretty good. So just a tip. We used to have a rule that the _references.js had to be in a folder called scripts. If you're like me, you don't necessarily like a folder called scripts. I prefer one called JS or whatever. But now you can put it wherever you want. Okay? We'll just find it. Visual Studio will just find it. And let's add a React.js file. So the highest requested feature, or the most requested feature in Visual Studio for anything web-related was support for React.js. Believe it or not. And it's because React.js is very, very unique. What they do is that they are creating an extension on top of JavaScript. Yes, yet another extension on top of JavaScript. And they call it JSX, X for XML, I guess. It's basically putting sort of XML literals into JavaScript. Or in our case, HTML. Okay? So this is sort of the reversed world. Like we have an HTML page with a script tag, and then we put JavaScript in there. That has worked for years. This is sort of the opposite. We have a JavaScript file where we just put inline HTML into. Neither the HTML editor or the JavaScript editor liked that in Visual Studio. But let's just create a JSX file. Let's create alert.jsx. And so we get this. So far, so good. What we did was we reached out to Facebook, which are the ones who built and maintain React.js, and asked them how are we going to implement this in the best way. And they've kind of helped us. And together we've come up with, I would say, like a pretty awesome way of doing it. Now, what you have in RC is the first time we ship it. Right? It wasn't in any of the CTPs, because there's a lot of initial work we had to do before we could start adding sort of the polish and the features. So it's a very unpolished editor. It is not perfect. It is only the beginning. And actually, I've opened the file like this before. But the first time you open a JSX file, you'll get a nice dialog box that says, hey, this is very new. We're working on it. Just FYI, there might be a few things. But we can now do stuff like var alert equals react dot. And now check this out. You get like nice IntelliSense here. Create class, like all this stuff comes out here. So create class. And let's just call ren tab. So here we have, you can see the colorization of my div right here inside JavaScript. We do have a little red squiggly. This is one of those things where you just ignore it in the RC. Right? We have fixed it already, but it didn't make it into the RC. And as you saw earlier, I had an issue with getting class equals. It said class name equals and all that. And that's because I've been playing around with with some of this stuff right here. Because in JSX, we cannot use the name class, because that's a reserved keyword in JavaScript. Right? So we do class name. So that's exactly how that works. And so this props.message, that. So this is now, I'm creating an Angular class or component. And so now I can say RRC, again a snippet. I love snippets. All right, here we go. And see here, we kind of data bind to this props for properties.message, which we haven't defined anywhere. We don't really have to. Message equals, hello, build. So the purpose of having the JSX editor in RC, the reason why we really wanted it out there for you guys to try out, is because, even though we know it's a little rocky, is because we wanted to make sure that we can unblock you. So for those of you who've tried it and got angry that it didn't work and you got a weird experience before, you are now unblocked to work on JSX, but I can promise you it's going to be so good when we're done with Visual Studio 2015. So this is JSX, and again we use gulp to compile it into JavaScript. Okay, so a few things here. What you might have noticed is that we have IntelliSense popping up in a few new places. So one of them is in JSON files. We get IntelliSense here. That's one place. Another place that you saw was inside, let's take our gulp file here, gulp.something. This is Node.js, right? This is not a JavaScript thing. This file is being executed by Node, okay? But this is the JavaScript editor. So how do we get the IntelliSense? Well, if we look, the answer we can find on top of any of these files here. Schemastore.org, which you might not have heard about. So this is schemastore.org. Open source, community run website here that has some stuff for JSON, for JavaScript. CSS is on its way. HTML will make it up here in some point. What's really cool here is that Visual Studio 2015 RC has built-in support for JSON schema and a connection to the schemastore.org repository of these 41 files. So that means not only can you create IntelliSense and validation for your own custom JSON formats, but you can add it to Schemastore and everyone will get it. And you can pair it up with files, file names. So we know that when we open a file called bower.json, Schemastore tells us that if you open a file called bower.json, this is the URL to the schema of that file. And if you send a pull request to this website, it will show up in everyone's Visual Studio automatically, if I take the pull request. Okay? Which I probably will. I don't know. Let's see. But this is how we drive all the project JSON stuff for ASP.NET 5. A lot of the Azure stuff's come through here. There's PHP and Chrome extension schemas here, but it drives IntelliSense. So now you can actually write extensions to Visual Studio without writing an extension. So we're going to see a lot of this coming in the future, where we centralize a lot of this stuff so that we can ship out of band and everyone can participate. That goes for JavaScript too. So this is a little bit newer, so there's not that much. But you saw how IntelliSense showed up for React and for gulp file. That's all here. That's these files are JavaScript files. You can add IntelliSense in here. And Visual Studio, in this case, for now, short term, Web Essentials will bring in these files. And IntelliSense just gets better. Okay? It simply just gets better. You don't have to do anything except installing Web Essentials, which you all will, maybe. So that's really cool. And so I'm really happy that we're going to do this for CSS as well. And we're going to do it for HTML. So all the schema files we have in Visual Studio, we're going to open source that. And we're going to put it out on Schemastore for everyone to help modify and update to the latest browser standards and W3C and blah, 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 blah. We can now all do that. It's all on GitHub. It's all static website, really easy to contribute to. So I'm really happy about that we can start open sourcing a lot of what drives the web tooling in Visual Studio, and we're going to see a lot more of that coming. All right, so here's how it works. The extensions that I was showing are all freely available. Web Essentials, of course. Add new file, open command line, great names. Glyphfriend, that is the one. That is the one that had the bootstrap icons and all that font awesome and foundation, all that stuff. React Snippet Pack, for those of you who want to play around with that. What I didn't get to show was Image Optimizer and multi-editing. Feel free to take a picture of this. So it's all up on visualstudiogallery.com. You can just search for these names. Image Optimizer, I had an extension called Image Optimizer for years. I then built that into Web Essentials. Then the old Image Optimizer extension stopped working. It was calling some servers that didn't exist anymore. And now I've ported what was in Web Essentials back into the old Image Optimizer and removed it from Web Essentials. I'm breaking things up a little bit. So you definitely want that. And improved it, so it compresses even better now, by the way. Multi-editing, really, really cool. Was just released last week for 2015. This is the one for all you Sublime lovers. Multi-carrots, multi-cursor support. Super cool. And with that, I'm not sure what this is. Here we go. We got a few minutes left for questions, so just raise your hand, say a question. I'll repeat it so everyone can hear it. Yes, sir. Node is installed by Visual Studio, yep. How do you update? Yes. So how do we update the things that Visual Studio installs, such as Node? Check this out. We can just go to Tools, Options. Oh, I am showing it. Tools, Options. And where is that thing? External Web Tools. And we can decide what path we want first. So what I've done is I'm using my own versions of Node.js because my global path is before the Visual Studio path. Like the default, restore default, is that we look in the Visual Studio first. So you can delete these, add new ones, and you're in control. Yep, you're in complete control. Yes, sir. Is there CDN support? There are Node modules that you can use through Gulp that will make that very easy. If you're using ASP.NET 5, we now have really, really cool tag helpers that has native CDN, including fallback support. So let's say the CDN is down, it'll load it to it locally. Like really, really awesome stuff. Yep. Yeah, is there an easy way to update packages such as NuGet packages or Bower packages? List them. What do you mean? Yes, no, you cannot. So for Bower, you cannot see what packages have an update ready for you. This is something we're looking at for an update potentially. But you can just open Bower.json and save the file. It will literally update things. It's pretty easy. Yes? So now that we're using, so the question is something like this. Now that we're using Node under the covers, it creates the Node modules folder. How are we going to handle the long path issue? If you don't check it into TFS, which I would not do that personally. Some people think it's a good idea. I don't. Then that's an issue. So I would just say you solve it for TFS by not checking it in. Because here, it's like NuGet packages. You don't check in your NuGet packages either, right? Which brings me to another extension that I didn't even talk about. It's called, because what we want to do, so Node is a hierarchy. So inside Node modules, you see Gulp, and inside that, there's a folder called Node modules that has other Node modules that has other Node modules, and long path exception, and poof, okay? So what we want to do is we want to flatten the packages so we don't have these deep hierarchies. And you can do that. There are stuff out there that will help you. Or we can just right-click Node modules and click Flatten Packages. And it asks, yeah, let's just try it. So it runs. So this is, again, a free extension. I have a thing with naming. This extension is called flatten packages. Yeah. And it runs in Node. This is Node that runs and does this. So Node doesn't have an issue with long path, right? So it's Node that actually executes this. That's why it works. Yeah. Last one. So the HTML5 or JavaScript-based Windows apps, yes, you can use Bower, Gulp, all of that stuff. In the beginning, you won't see the Solution Explorer, the dependency node. You won't see that show up, but you get, like if you add a Bower file, you save it, it will restore the packages. You can use Gulp. That's all the same. The Task Runner Explorer works, all that stuff. Yep. For any project types, if you want to create a WinForms or console app, that works too. I don't know why you would, yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm out of time. Please come up afterwards. Thank you very much, the ones that are left. Thank you. And remember to do the evaluations, please.